Hey there, safety pros, and welcome to another deep dive with us. Today, we're going to be taking a closer look at something that I think every safety professional needs to know, and that is whether or not you need to keep those detailed OSHA injury and illness records.
Yes, definitely.
So to help us unpack this whole thing today, we have two really good sources.
Yeah.
We have a section straight from the OSHA website.
Okay.
And we also have a super helpful explainer video from Safety One Source on YouTube.
Oh, excellent. I love their videos. They make it so easy to understand.
Yeah, they really do break it down. And, you know, Safety One Source is always on top of their game when it comes to OSHA compliance.
Absolutely. They really know their stuff.
Yeah.
So this is going to be good.
So let's jump right in.
Okay.
Both of our sources today highlight this magic number 10 employees.
Right.
So if your company had 10 or fewer employees at all times throughout the last calendar year,
Okay.
you are generally exempt from keeping those detailed records.
Yeah.
Now, that being said, we're talking company-wide here, right? Not per location or department.
That's a really good point, and that's something that's often misunderstood.
Yeah.
It's the total number of employees across the entire company.
Okay.
So even if you have multiple work sites or branches,
Right.
it's that total number that counts.
Right.
And it includes part-time workers and seasonal workers, too, which is something that often trips people up.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So let's say you had a situation where you had 9 employees for most of the year, but you briefly hired a temp worker, bringing your total to 11 for just a few weeks.
Yeah, even a temporary bump over that 10-employee threshold means that you are not exempt for that entire calendar year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so you'll need to maintain those OSHA records.
Okay, so no escaping those forms then.
It's all about being prepared, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So, you know, I know both sources also mention some important exceptions.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you are under that 10-employee limit,
Yeah.
are there times when you would still be required to keep records?
Absolutely. OSHA or the Bureau of Labor Statistics can still require you to keep records in specific situations, even if you are under the threshold.
Okay.
They'll notify you in writing if that's the case, though.
Oh, okay. So always keep an eye out for any official correspondence from OSHA or the Bureau of Labor Statistics.
Exactly.
Okay. And of course, there's that one big reporting requirement that applies to all employers, regardless of size.
Right. No matter how many employees you have, you must report to OSHA any work-related fatality.
Right.
Inpatient hospitalization of an employee, amputation, or loss of an eye.
Yeah. The good reminder that these reporting requirements that we're talking about right now are separate from the detailed record keeping that we were just talking about.
Yes, good point. It's a totally separate thing.
Yeah. And they're absolutely critical, even for the smallest businesses.
For sure.
Now, speaking of specific rules,
Okay.
OSHA mentioned certain industries that have their own set of regulations.
Yes, that's right. So even if you had more than 10 employees at any point during the last calendar year, you might still not be required to keep the full OSHA injury and illness records
Okay.
if your business falls under one of these partially exempt industries.
Oh, that's really interesting. I wouldn't have guessed that.
Yeah, it can get a little tricky.
Yeah.
So there are specific rules for certain types of businesses like construction or maritime activities, for example.
Okay, so if you think that your business might fall into one of those categories,
Yeah.
definitely worth doing some research.
Yes.
And OSHA's website is a good place for that.
Absolutely.
Now, both sources also talk about peak employment, which I think sounds pretty important.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean exactly?
So peak employment is a really key factor in determining your record-keeping obligations.
Okay.
Basically, it means you need to look back at the highest number of employees you had at any point during the previous calendar year
Okay.
to figure out if you hit that 11-employee mark or not.
Okay. So even if I'm currently under 10 employees, if I had a period of growth last year where I hit 11 or more, I'd still need to keep those records for this year.
Exactly. It's all about that highest point of employment, not just your current staffing levels.
Okay.
And remember, it's based on the previous calendar year.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So it's not just about where you are right now. It's about
Yeah.
where you were and where you might be going.
It's about being proactive and staying ahead of the game.
I like that stay ahead of the game.
Right?
So to recap what we've covered so far,
Mm-hmm.
we've got that 10-employee threshold,
Right.
but with some important exceptions.
Yes.
There are some specific situations and industries where the rules might be different, And we need to always remember that peak employment is the deciding factor.
Exactly. And don't forget, Safety One Source has a great video breaking all of this down.
Yeah.
So if you're looking for a clear and concise explanation, be sure to check that out.
Definitely a great resource.
Yeah.
Okay, so this whole idea of peak employment being based on the previous year got me thinking, what steps can you take now to be prepared for those record-keeping requirements in the future, especially if you anticipate your business growing?
That's a great question, and one that I think every safety professional should be considering.
Yeah, being proactive can really save you a lot of headaches down the road.
Absolutely.
So what are some things that you can do to kind of get ahead of the game?
Well, one of the most important things is to understand your staffing needs and projections.
Okay, so if you're expecting, a surge in hiring,
Yeah.
you're going to want to make sure that you're prepared to meet those record-keeping requirements.
Exactly. You're going to want to start thinking about things like training your staff,
Okay.
establishing clear procedures for recording injuries and illnesses, and maybe even exploring different software options to help you manage those records efficiently.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah,
It's all about being prepared and having a plan in place.
absolutely.
Now, let's kind of shift gears a bit and dive into those reporting requirements that apply to all employers, regardless of size.
Okay, sounds good. Those are critical, and it's really important to make sure everyone's clear on what those entail.
Yeah, both of our sources really emphasize this, and for good reason. We're talking about situations that demand immediate attention. So fatalities,
Yeah.
hospitalizations, amputations, loss of an eye, those need to be reported to OSHA immediately.
And there's no wiggle room here.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you have 2 employees or 200. These reporting requirements apply to every single employer covered by the OSHA Act.
Now, our Safety One Source video doesn't get into the specifics of how to report these incidents,
Right.
but the OSHA website has all those details that you need, right?
Absolutely. They outline the exact procedures
Yeah.
and the timeframes involved. So listeners, make sure you bookmark that page
Yeah.
and familiarize yourself with the steps. Because when a serious incident happens, you need to act quickly.
Yeah. Time is of the essence in these situations.
Absolutely.
And while we're on the topic of reporting, I think it's worth clarifying the difference between these immediate incident reports and those detailed injury and illness records that we talked about earlier.
Oh, that's a great point. It's easy to get those two things confused.
So just to recap, those detailed records
Yeah.
with all the specific information about each case, that's what you might be exempt from if you have 10 or fewer employees.
Exactly.
But those immediate reports for fatalities, hospitalizations, amputations, eye loss, those are a separate requirement, and they apply to everyone no matter how small your business is.
Right. Think of it this way.
Okay.
The detailed records are like keeping a logbook of all the bumps and bruises.
Yeah.
While those immediate reports are like sending out an emergency alert when something truly serious happens.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
So one is about ongoing tracking and analysis,
Right.
and the other is about immediate response
Yeah.
and ensuring that OSHA is aware of the critical incident.
Exactly.
So listeners, remember, even if you're exempt from routine record keeping, you are never exempt from reporting those serious incidents.
That's right.
And it's always better to err on the side of caution.
Absolutely. When in doubt, reach out to OSHA or a qualified safety professional for guidance.
Absolutely. They're there to help you ensure a safe and healthy workplace for everyone.
Exactly. And speaking of resources, I think it's worth highlighting Safety One Source again.
Yeah.
I mean, they really do go above and beyond in making this often complex information accessible and easy to understand.
Yeah. And their video does a fantastic job of breaking down that 10-employee exemption
Yeah.
in a really clear and concise way. And I love how they emphasize the importance of staying informed and proactive, which is something we're big advocates of here on the Deep Dive.
Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to safety. And Safety One Source makes it easy to empower yourself with the knowledge you need to stay compliant and protect your workforce.
They truly are a valuable partner for safety professionals. Now, let's kind of shift gears a bit and talk about some of the nuances of this 10-employee exemption.
Okay, I'm always up for a good nuanced discussion. What's on your mind?
Well, both of our sources mentioned that this exemption is based on your employment numbers during the last calendar year,
Right. That's a crucial detail to keep in mind.
because it means your current situation might not actually reflect your record-keeping obligation.
Exactly. So let's say you currently have 8 employees,
Okay.
but last year you briefly had a team of 12 for a special project.
Okay.
You'd still be required to keep those detailed records this year, even though you're technically under the 10-employee threshold right now.
Wow.
It all comes back to that peak employment figure we discussed earlier.
Okay, so it's not just about where you stand today, it's about looking back at your employment history
Yeah,
and anticipating future growth as well.
absolutely. Which is why we love that final thought-provoking question you left our listeners with last time.
Right.
Thinking about those future staffing needs and preparing accordingly.
It's all about being proactive and staying one step ahead when it comes to safety compliance.
Yeah.
Now let's dive into those partially exempt industries.
Ah, yes. Those special cases where even having more than 10 employees might not automatically trigger the full record-keeping requirements.
I'm really curious to hear more about this.
Sure.
What are some examples of these industries?
Well, unfortunately, our sources don't provide a comprehensive list,
Okay.
but they do point us in the right direction.
Oh, okay. So where can we find out more?
The OSHA website.
Ah, okay.
Yep.
So listeners, if you think that your business might fall under one of these partially exempt categories, head over to OSHA.gov
Yes.
and do some digging.
Absolutely. They have a wealth of resources available, including industry-specific guidelines.
Okay, fantastic. Now let's talk about some practical tips for determining whether or not you need to keep those detailed OSHA records.
All right. I love a good practical tip. What do you have in mind?
Well, first and foremost,
Yeah.
gather your employment data from the last calendar year.
Okay, step 1.
Step 1, determine that peak employment number.
And remember, it's company-wide,
Right.
not just per location or
Or
department.
even be wide.
Yeah.
Consider all employees, including full-time, part-time, seasonal, temporary workers.
All of them.
Everyone.
Yep.
Okay, so once you have that peak employment number,
Yeah.
you can apply that 10 employee threshold.
Right.
So if you were at 10 or fewer employees at all times during the year, you're generally exempt.
Generally exempt unless OSHA or the Bureau of Labor Statistics has specifically informed you otherwise.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But if you hit 11 or more employees at any point, you'll need to maintain those detailed records.
You got it. Unless, of course, your business falls under one of those partially exempt industries we discussed earlier.
Right. So be sure to check those industry-specific guidelines on OSHA's website.
Yes, always a good idea.
And if you're still unsure, don't hesitate to reach out to OSHA or a qualified safety professional for guidance.
Absolutely. It's always better to be safe than sorry. Absolutely. Compliance is key when it comes to OSHA regulations. Now let's talk about some of the benefits of keeping those detailed records, even if you're technically exempt.
That's an interesting perspective. Why would a company choose to do that?
Well, for starters, it can help you identify trends and patterns in workplace injuries and illnesses.
Ah, I see. Which can then be used to develop targeted safety interventions.
Exactly. It's all about being proactive and preventing future incidents.
Right.
Those records can also be really valuable for training purposes.
Oh, yeah.
You can use real-life examples to illustrate the importance of safety procedures.
And demonstrate the potential consequences of non-compliance.
Plus, having those records readily available can be helpful if OSHA ever conducts an inspection.
Absolutely. It shows that you're taking safety seriously and are committed to tracking and addressing potential hazards.
Yeah, and it can make that inspection process much smoother.
For sure, it's all about demonstrating due diligence and a culture of safety.
Now let's shift gears again and talk about some of the potential challenges of record keeping.
Challenges? What kind of challenges are we talking about?
Well, for some smaller businesses, it can be a bit of an administrative burden.
Yeah, especially if they don't have dedicated safety personnel.
Exactly. It takes time and effort to accurately record and maintain those logs.
And there's always the risk of human error.
Right, which is why it's important to have clear procedures in place.
Yes.
And provide proper training to those responsible for record keeping.
And, technology can also play a role in simplifying the process.
Yeah.
There are software programs designed specifically for OSHA record keeping.
Yeah, they can automate certain tasks and reduce the risk of errors.
Exactly. But it's important to choose a system that meets your specific needs and integrates well with your existing workflows.
Right. And of course, there's the cost factor to consider.
Some of those software programs can be quite expensive.
Yeah. But there are also free resources available.
True.
Such as OSHA's online record-keeping tools.
So it's all about finding that right balance between cost functionality and ease of use.
Right. And remember, even if you choose to use a software program, it's still crucial to have a good understanding of the underlying OSHA regulations.
Absolutely. Technology can be a helpful tool, but it's not a substitute for knowledge and expertise.
Right. You need to be able to interpret the data.
Yes.
And make informed decisions based on your understanding of those regulations.
Exactly.
Now let's wrap up this segment by talking about some best practices for OSHA record keeping.
Love a good best practice. What are your top tips?
Well, first and foremost, establish clear responsibilities.
Okay, make sure everyone knows who's in charge of what.
And provide them with the necessary training and resources.
Absolutely.
Second, develop a consistent process for recording and reporting incidents.
Okay. Use standardized forms and ensure that all the information is accurate and complete.
Third, review your records regularly.
Good idea. Look for trends and patterns that could indicate areas for improvement.
Right, and use that data to develop those targeted safety interventions.
Exactly.
Fourth, keep your records organized and accessible.
Yes, in case of an OSHA inspection, you'll need to be able to produce them promptly.
And finally, stay up to date on OSHA regulations.
Yes, they can change, so it's important to be aware of any updates or revisions.
All right, listeners, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive on OSHA record keeping.
We have.
We've explored the 10-employee exemption.
Yep.
The reporting requirements for serious incidents. The partially exempt industries. And some practical tips for staying compliant.
Yes.
But before we wrap up completely, I want to leave you with one final thought-provoking question.
Oh, I love a good thought-provoking question.
Yeah.
What do you have for us?
Well, we've talked a lot about the legal requirements of OSHA record keeping.
Right.
But we also need to think about the human side of things.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, we're talking about people's lives and well-being here.
Yeah.
These records represent real injuries and illnesses that have happened to real people.
That's a really important point. It's easy to get caught up in the technicalities of compliance.
Yeah.
But we can't forget that there are real people behind these numbers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So as safety professionals, we have a responsibility to go beyond just checking boxes and filling out forms.
I agree.
We need to use this information to make a real difference in people's lives.
That's a powerful message. It's not just about compliance, it's about caring.
And that's what truly sets great safety professionals apart.
Well said.
Well, now, before we sign off, we want to give another shout out to our friends at Safety One Source for their fantastic resources.
Absolutely. Their explainer video was a great starting point for our deep dive today.
And their website is chock full of helpful information on all things safety.
They really are a valuable partner for safety professionals.
All right, that's a wrap for today's episode of The Deep Dive.
Thanks for joining us.
And remember, stay safe, stay informed, and keep diving deep.
Until next time. Yeah, you know, it's interesting to think about how those partially exempt industries might impact record keeping.
Yeah.
What are some of the unique challenges that those businesses might face?
Yeah, I would think that it would really depend on the specific industry.
Right.
And the nature of the work that they're doing.
Exactly.
But I bet a common challenge is just simply staying up to date on the latest regulations.
Oh, for sure. Especially when you consider that OSHA has specific requirements for certain industries.
Right.
It can get really tricky to keep track of all the different rules and exemptions.
Yeah, it sounds like it'd be really easy to miss something accidentally if you weren't careful.
Oh, absolutely. That's why it's so important to have a really reliable source of information, like Safety One Source.
Yeah.
They do such a good job of keeping their resources current and tailored to different industries, which can be such a huge help for safety professionals.
I totally agree. And while we're on the topic of partially exempt industries, it's worth remembering that even within those industries, there are still those immediate reporting requirements we talked about earlier.
Exactly.
Fatalities, hospitalizations, amputations, loss of an eye.
Right.
Those need to be reported to OSHA no matter what.
Absolutely. Those incidents require immediate attention regardless of any industry-specific exemptions.
Right.
It's all about making sure that we're ensuring the safety and well-being of workers across the board.
Okay, so let's say I'm a safety professional.
Okay.
And I'm trying to figure out whether or not I need to keep those detailed OSHA records.
All right.
Where should I start?
Well, the first step is to gather your employment data from the last calendar year.
Okay.
And determine your peak employment number.
Okay.
Remembering that it's the company-wide count that matters.
Okay.
Not just per location or department.
Right.
And include all of your employees.
Okay.
Full-time, part-time, seasonal, temporary.
Everyone.
Got it.
So once I have that peak employment number,
yes,
I can see if I fall into that 10-employee threshold. So if I was at 10 or fewer employees all year, then I'm generally exempt from keeping the detailed records, unless OSHA or the Bureau of Labor Statistics has specifically told me otherwise.
That's right. And don't forget to consider those partially exempt industries.
Right.
If you think your business might fall into one of those categories, do some research on OSHA's website to make sure you're meeting those specific requirements.
Okay, that makes sense. But what if I hit 11 or more employees at any point during the year?
Then you'll need to maintain those detailed OSHA records.
Okay.
Unless your business falls under one of those special exempt industries we discussed.
Right. And even then, it's always a good idea to double check those industry-specific guidelines on OSHA's website just to be safe.
Exactly. Better to be safe than sorry.
Right.
Compliance is key when it comes to OSHA.
Absolutely. Now, here's something I've always wondered.
Okay.
Why should companies keep those detailed records, even if they're technically exempt? What's the benefit?
That's a great question. Sometimes we get so focused on compliance that we forget about the bigger picture. Keeping those detailed records, even if you're not required to, can be incredibly valuable for improving safety within your organization.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Can you give me some specific examples?
Sure. For starters, those records can help you identify trends and patterns in workplace injuries and illnesses.
Okay.
Are certain types of injuries happening more frequently?
Uh-huh.
Are there any particular departments or job roles that seem to have higher incident rates?
So by analyzing those trends, you can kind of start to pinpoint areas that might need some extra attention.
Exactly.
In terms of safety training or hazard mitigation.
Exactly. It allows you to be proactive and prevent future incidents from happening. You can use the data to develop targeted safety interventions and create a safer work environment for everyone.
And those records can be really useful for training purposes too, right?
Absolutely.
You can use real-life examples from your own workplace to illustrate the importance of safety procedures.
Absolutely. It's one thing to tell employees to follow the rules,
Right.
but it's so much more impactful when you can show them real-life examples of what can happen when those rules aren't followed. And you can highlight the potential consequences of non-compliance.
Right.
Using those records to emphasize the seriousness of workplace safety.
Plus, having those records readily available can be really helpful if OSHA ever conducts an inspection.
Right. It shows OSHA that you are taking safety seriously and that you have a system in place to track and address potential hazards.
And that you're being transparent about your safety record.
Exactly. Transparency is key when it comes to building trust and credibility with OSHA. It can make the inspection process so much smoother and less stressful.
It's all about demonstrating that due diligence and fostering a culture of safety within your organization.
And that goes a long way in protecting your employees and your business.
I completely agree. Now let's kind of flip the coin and talk about some of the potential challenges of record keeping. I can imagine that it can be a little daunting, especially for smaller businesses.
You're absolutely right. It can definitely be a challenge, particularly for those who don't have dedicated safety personnel.
Right. It takes time and effort to accurately record those incidents and maintain those logs. And there's always that human element. The risk of making mistakes.
That's a valid point. That's why it's so important to have clear, well-defined procedures in place for recording and reporting incidents.
Right. And to provide proper training to whoever's responsible for handling those records.
Exactly. You want to make sure everyone's on the same page and understands the importance of accuracy and consistency.
And there's also those technology options that we talked about earlier.
Yes.
There are some great software programs out there that are designed specifically for OSHA record keeping.
Absolutely.
And they can really help streamline the process and reduce those human errors.
Those programs can be real lifesavers. Automating certain tasks and making it so much easier to manage those records.
Right.
But it's important to choose a system that fits your needs and integrates well with your existing workflows.
And of course, there's the cost factor to consider.
Right. Some of those programs can be quite an investment.
Yeah. But there are also free resources available.
True. OSHA has some fantastic online tools that can be a big help, especially for smaller businesses.
So it's all about finding that right balance between cost functionality and ease of use.
And never underestimate the power of good old-fashioned research.
Right.
Spend some time exploring the different options,
Yeah.
talking to other safety professionals to get their recommendations.
That's great advice. And I think it's important to remember that even if you're using a fancy software program, you still need a good understanding of the underlying OSHA regulations.
Absolutely. Technology is a fantastic tool, but it can't replace that human knowledge and expertise.
Right. You need to be able to interpret those records, analyze the data, and make informed decisions based on your understanding of the rules. So let's wrap up this segment with some best practices for OSHA record keeping.
Okay, I love a good best practice.
What are your top tips for making this whole process as smooth and effective as possible?
Great question. First and foremost, I'd say establish clear responsibilities.
Make sure everyone knows who's in charge of what.
and provide them with the training and resources they need to do their jobs effectively.
Okay, so that's step one. What else?
Well, once you've established who's doing what, it's important to develop a consistent process for recording and reporting incidents.
Consistency is key. I like that.
Exactly. Use standardized forms, ensure all the information is accurate and complete,
Okay.
and make sure everyone is following the same procedures.
That makes a lot of sense. It helps avoid confusion and ensures that your records are reliable and consistent.
Right. Now, once you have those records, don't just let them sit there gathering dust.
Right.
Review them regularly,
Okay.
looking for trends and patterns that could indicate areas for improvement.
That's a great point. It's not just about recording the incidents. It's about using that information to make your workplace safer.
Absolutely. Use that data to develop targeted safety interventions. It's all about being proactive and staying one step ahead.
And finally, keep those records organized and accessible.
Yes. In case of an OSHA inspection, you'll need to be able to produce them quickly and efficiently.
Right. Nobody wants to be scrambling to find those files when an inspector shows up.
Exactly. It just adds to the stress and it can make the inspection more challenging.
All right, so we talked about establishing clear responsibilities, developing consistent processes, reviewing records regularly, and keeping everything organized and accessible. Is there anything else that we should keep in mind?
I think it's crucial to emphasize the importance of staying up to date on those OSHA regulations.
Right.
They can change, and it's important to be aware of any updates or revisions that might impact your record-keeping requirements.
That's a great reminder. The world of safety is constantly evolving, and we need to evolve with it. Now, before we move on, I want to touch on something that often gets overlooked in these discussions.
Oh, I'm all ears. What's on your mind?
We've been talking a lot about the technicalities of record keeping, but let's not forget about the human element.
You mean the fact that these records represent real injuries and illnesses that have happened to real people?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in the numbers and the regulations, but we can't lose sight of the fact that these records have a very real impact on people's lives.
You're absolutely right. These aren't just data points.
Yeah.
They represent pain, suffering, lost time at work, financial hardship.
And sometimes even more tragic consequences.
So as safety professionals, it's crucial that we approach record keeping with compassion and empathy.
It's not just about fulfilling a legal obligation. It's about recognizing the very real human cost of workplace injuries and illnesses.
And using that understanding to drive our efforts to create safer, healthier workplaces.
And speaking of creating safer workplaces, I think it's time to give another shout out to our friends at Safety One Source.
I completely agree.
Their resources are invaluable for staying informed, proactive, and committed to building a culture of safety.
I couldn't agree more. They really are a fantastic resource for safety professionals at all levels.
So listeners, if you're looking for guidance on OSHA compliance training materials, or just a supportive community of like-minded professionals,
Yes.
be sure to check out Safety One Source.
You won't regret it. They're truly a valuable partner for anyone who's passionate about workplace safety.
All right, let's shift gears a bit and dive into those partially exempt industries.
Okay.
It's an area that can be a little confusing, so I'm kind of looking forward to shedding some light on it.
I'm happy to help clear things up. It's a topic that often generates a lot of questions, so let's break it down.
Great. So, as we mentioned earlier, even if you had more than 10 employees at any point during the last calendar year, you might still not need to keep those full OSHA injury and illness records.
Right.
If your business falls under one of these special categories.
Right. And it's important to remember that these exemptions are specific to certain industries and activities.
Okay.
So it's not a blanket exemption for every business with more than 10 employees.
That makes sense. It's all about the nature of the work being done.
Exactly. And that's why it's crucial to consult OSHA's website for the most up-to-date information on these partially exempt industries.
Okay.
They have detailed resources that outline the specific criteria and requirements for each category.
Now, I'm curious about some examples of these partially exempt industries.
Sure.
What are some of the more common ones that safety professionals might encounter?
Well, as we mentioned earlier, certain construction and maritime activities have their own specific OSHA regulations,
Right.
which might include exemptions from the full record-keeping requirements.
So if I'm working in construction or maritime,
Yeah.
it's extra important to do my homework.
Yes.
and make sure that I'm following the right rules.
Absolutely. And it's not just limited to those two industries. There are other sectors like agriculture, retail, and even some service industries
Right.
that might have specific exemptions based on their unique work environments and potential hazards.
It sounds like you can get pretty nuanced depending on the industry.
It definitely can. And that's why it's so important to consult those industry-specific guidelines on OSHA's website.
Okay.
They can help you navigate those nuances and ensure you're meeting all the requirements that apply to your business.
So listeners, if you're thinking, I wonder if my business falls under one of these partially exempt categories, what's the best way to find out for sure?
Head over to OSHA.gov.
Okay.
They have a wealth of resources available, including a section dedicated to industry-specific information.
Like a treasure trove of safety knowledge.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And don't hesitate to reach out to OSHA directly if you have any questions or need clarification.
Okay.
They're always happy to help.
They are a fantastic resource.
Okay.
Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about some practical tips for determining whether or not you need to keep those detailed OSHA records. Sometimes it's just helpful to have a step-by-step guide to kind of walk you through the process.
I agree. It can be overwhelming trying to sort through all the information.
Yeah.
So having a clear roadmap can make things much easier.
Okay, so step 1, gather your employment data from the last calendar year.
Right. Remember, you need to determine your peak employment number, which is the highest number of employees you had at any point during the year.
And don't forget, it's company-wide,
Exactly.
not just per location or department.
Include all employees, full-time, part-time, seasonal, and temporary workers.
Everyone.
Every single person who worked for your company during that calendar year needs to be counted.
Once you have that peak employment number, you can compare it to that magic number 10.
Right.
If you're at 10 or fewer employees at all times during the year, you're generally exempt.
Unless, of course, OSHA or the Bureau of Labor Statistics has specifically informed you otherwise.
Right. It's always important to double check and make sure there are no special circumstances that might apply to your business.
Now, if you hit 11 or more employees at any point during the year, you'll need to maintain those detailed OSHA records.
Unless my business falls under one of those partially exempt industries we discussed earlier.
Exactly. So once again, be sure to check those industry-specific guidelines on OSHA's website.
Right. And if you're still unsure after all that, don't hesitate to reach out to OSHA or a qualified safety professional for guidance.
It's always better to err on the side of caution and get those questions answered.
Now let's talk about the benefits of keeping those detailed records, even if you're technically exempt.
Okay.
I know we touched on this a little bit earlier, but I think it's worth diving a little deeper.
I agree. There's a lot to be gained from proactively maintaining those records, even if it's not a legal requirement.
For starters, those records can be incredibly valuable for identifying trends and patterns in workplace injuries and illnesses.
That's right. By analyzing those records, you can start to see if certain types of injuries are happening more frequently, or if there are any particular departments or job roles
that have higher incident rates.
So it's all about using that data to pinpoint areas that might need some extra attention in terms of safety training or hazard mitigation.
Exactly. It's about being proactive and preventing future incidents from happening. You can use those records to develop targeted safety interventions and create a safer, healthier work environment for everyone.
And those records can also be really useful for training purposes.
Oh, absolutely.
You can use real-life examples from your own workplace to illustrate the importance of safety procedures and the potential consequences of non-compliance.
It's one thing to tell employees to follow the rules, but it's another thing entirely to show them what can happen when those rules aren't followed. Using real-life examples from your own records can be a powerful way to drive home the message of safety.
It's about making it personal and relatable.
Exactly. It's about showing employees that these aren't just abstract rules.
Right.
They're real-world guidelines that are designed to protect them. And having those records readily available can be a huge help if OSHA ever conducts an inspection.
Absolutely. It demonstrates to OSHA that you're taking safety seriously and that you have a system in place to track and address potential hazards.
And that you're organized, transparent, and committed to creating a safe work environment.
Exactly. And that can make a big difference in how smoothly the inspection process goes.
It's all about building trust and credibility with OSHA.
And demonstrating your commitment to a culture of safety.
Now let's flip the coin and talk about some of the potential challenges of record keeping.
Okay.
I know we touched on this earlier, but I think it's worth diving a little deeper.
I agree. It's important to acknowledge that record keeping can be a bit daunting, especially for smaller businesses or those without dedicated safety personnel.
It takes time and effort to accurately record those incidents and maintain those logs. And there's always that human element, the risk of making mistakes.
That's a valid point. And that's why it's so important to have clear, well-defined procedures in place for recording and reporting incidents.
Right. And to provide proper training to whoever's responsible for handling those records.
Exactly. You want to make sure everyone's on the same page and understands the importance of accuracy and consistency.
And there's also those technology options we talked about earlier. There are some great software programs out there designed specifically for OSHA record keeping.
Absolutely.
Which can help streamline the process and reduce those human errors.
Those programs can be real lifesavers, automating certain tasks and making it easier to manage those records. But it's important to choose a system that fits your needs and integrates well with your existing workflows.
And of course, there's the cost factor to consider. Some of those programs can be quite an investment.
Right. But there are also free resources available. OSHA has some fantastic online tools that can be a big help, especially for smaller businesses.
So it's all about finding that right balance between cost, functionality, and ease of use.
And never underestimate the power of good old-fashioned research.
Right.
Spend some time exploring the different options, talking to other safety professionals to get their recommendations.
That's great advice. And I think it's important to remember that even if you're using a fancy software program, you still need a good understanding of the underlying OSHA regulations.
Absolutely. Technology is a fantastic tool, but it can't replace that human knowledge and expertise.
Right. You need to be able to interpret those records, analyze the data, and make informed decisions based on your understanding of the rules.
So let's wrap up this segment with some best practices for OSHA record keeping.
Love a good best practice. What are your top tips for making this whole process as smooth and effective as possible?
Great question. First and foremost, I'd say establish clear responsibilities.
Make sure everyone knows who's in charge of what.
And provide them with the training and resources they need to do their jobs effectively.
Okay, so that's step one. What else?
Well, once you've established who's doing what, it's important to develop a consistent process for recording and reporting incidents.
Consistency is key.
Yeah.
I like that.
Exactly. Use standardized forms, ensure all the information is accurate and complete, and make sure everyone is following the same procedures.
That makes a lot of sense. It helps avoid confusion and ensures that your records are reliable and consistent.
Right. Now, once you have those records, don't just let them sit there gathering dust. Review them regularly, looking for trends and patterns that could indicate areas for improvement.
That's a great point. It's not just about recording the incidents. It's about using that information to make your workplace safer.
Absolutely. Use that data to develop targeted safety interventions. It's all about being proactive and staying one step ahead.
And finally, keep those records organized and accessible.
Yes. In case of an OSHA inspection, you'll need to be able to produce them quickly and efficiently.
Right. No one wants to be scrambling to find those files when an inspector shows up. It just adds to the stress and could make the inspection more challenging.
All right, so we've talked about establishing clear responsibilities, developing consistent processes, reviewing records regularly, and keeping everything organized and accessible.
Is there anything else that we should keep in mind?
I think it's crucial to emphasize the importance of staying up to date on those OSHA regulations. They can change, and it's important to be aware of any updates or revisions that might impact your record-keeping requirements.
That's a great reminder. The world of safety is constantly evolving, and we need to evolve with it. Now, before we move on, I want to touch on something that often gets overlooked in these discussions.
Oh, I'm all ears. What's on your mind?
We've been talking a lot about the technicalities of record keeping, but let's not forget about the human element.
You mean the fact that these records represent real injuries and illnesses that have happened to real people?
Exactly. It's easy to get caught up in the numbers and the regulations, but we can't lose sight of the fact that these records have a very real impact on people's lives.
You're absolutely right. These aren't just data points. They represent pain, suffering, lost time at work, financial hardship.
And sometimes even more tragic consequences.
So as safety professionals, it's crucial that we approach record keeping with compassion and empathy.
It's not just about fulfilling a legal obligation. It's about recognizing the very real human cost of workplace injuries and illnesses.
And using that understanding to drive our efforts to create safer, healthier workplaces.
Now, before we wrap up this deep dive, there's one more thing that I wanted to bring up.
Right.
It's something that caught my eye in the OSHA source material.
Okay.
And I'm curious to get your take on it.
I'm always up for a good challenge. What did you find?
Well, they specifically mentioned that even if you're exempt from keeping those detailed OSHA records,
Yeah.
you still need to report any work-related injury or illness that results in a fatality, inpatient hospitalization, amputation, or loss of an eye.
Right. We talked about those immediate reporting requirements earlier. They apply to every employer regardless of size or industry.
Exactly. But here's what I found interesting.
Okay.
They say you need to report those incidents even if you're exempt from keeping the records.
I see what you mean. It does seem a bit redundant at first glance, doesn't it?
Because if you're not keeping those detailed records in the first place, how would you even know if an incident met those criteria for reporting?
That's a valid point. It highlights the importance of understanding those regulations inside and out,
Right.
even if you think you're exempt from certain aspects of them.
It's like a little reminder that those serious incidents can still happen, even in workplaces that are generally exempt from the detailed record keeping.
And that you still have a responsibility to report them promptly and accurately?
It's all about staying vigilant and informed,
Yes.
regardless of your company's size or the specific industry you're in.
And it reinforces the idea that safety is everyone's responsibility. We all have a role to play in preventing those serious incidents from happening in the first place.
Now, before we wrap up completely, I have one more question. Since we're talking about the importance of reporting those serious incidents, what are some of the key things that employers need to keep in mind when it comes to making those reports to OSHA?
That's a great question. It's essential to be prepared and know what to do if you encounter one of those situations where you need to make a report. So let's break down the key points.
Perfect. I think this will be really helpful for our listeners.
First and foremost, understand the timeframes involved.
Yeah.
OSHA has specific deadlines for reporting those serious incidents.
Right. It's not something you can put off or delay.
Exactly. For example, any work-related fatality must be reported to OSHA within 8 hours.
Wow, that's a tight time frame.
It is. And for any inpatient hospitalization, amputation, or loss of an eye, you have 24 hours to report it to OSHA.
So it's crucial to have a clear understanding of those timeframes and to have a system in place for making those reports quickly and efficiently.
Absolutely. You don't want to be scrambling to figure things out when time is of the essence.
Now, how do you actually make those reports to OSHA? What's the process like?
OSHA offers several ways to report those incidents. You can do it online through their website, by phone, or by fax.
So there are options to suit different preferences and levels of comfort with technology.
Exactly. And OSHA has detailed instructions on their website for each reporting method.
It sounds like they've made it pretty user-friendly.
They have. They understand the importance of making the reporting process as straightforward as possible.
Now, what kind of information does OSHA need when you're making those reports?
They'll need specific details about the incident, including the date, time, location, and a description of what happened.
And, of course, they'll need information about the injured or deceased employee.
Right. You'll need to provide their name, job title, and any relevant medical information.
It sounds like it's important to gather all the necessary information as quickly and accurately as possible.
Absolutely. The more information you can provide to OSHA, the better they can understand the incident and take appropriate action.
And speaking of taking action, what happens after you make that report to OSHA?
Well, OSHA will review the information you provided and determine whether or not further investigation is warranted.
So there's a chance that they might conduct an on-site inspection.
There is. But even if they don't conduct a full-blown inspection, they might still follow up with you to gather additional information or to provide guidance on how to prevent similar incidents from happening in the future.
So it's important to be prepared to answer their questions and to cooperate fully with any requests they might have.
Absolutely. Remember, OSHA's ultimate goal is to ensure workplace safety. By reporting those serious incidents and working with them, you're helping to create a safer environment for everyone.
Now let's shift gears for a moment and talk about something that often gets overlooked in these discussions about OSHA record keeping and reporting. It's something that's near and dear to my heart, and I think it's crucial to address it.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, we've been talking a lot about the technical aspects of compliance, the rules, the regulations, the paperwork.
Right.
But let's not forget about the human side of this equation.
You mean the fact that these records represent real people who have experienced real injuries or illnesses?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in the numbers and the deadlines, but we can't lose sight of the fact that there are real people behind those statistics.
You're absolutely right. It's essential to approach this topic with empathy and compassion.
These aren't just data points on a spreadsheet. They represent real lives that have been impacted by workplace incidents.
People who may be dealing with pain, suffering financial hardship, and emotional distress.
And their families who are also affected by those incidents.
So as safety professionals, it's our duty to go beyond just fulfilling our legal obligations. We need to see those records as a reminder of the human cost of workplace incidents.
And to use that awareness to drive our efforts to prevent future incidents from happening.
It's about creating a culture of safety that values every employee and prioritizes their well-being above all else.
And that's a message that resonates deeply with me. It's why I'm so passionate about safety. It's not just about rules and regulations, it's about people.
Well said. And I think it's a message that everyone involved in workplace safety needs to hear.
Absolutely. And I'm so grateful that we had the opportunity to talk about this today.
Me too. It's been a great discussion.
Now, before we move on to our final thoughts, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the incredible work that Safety OneSource does in helping to make workplaces safer.
Yes.
Their commitment to providing high-quality, accessible safety resources is truly commendable.
I couldn't agree more. They're a true asset to the safety community.
So listeners, if you're looking for guidance on OSHA compliance training materials or just a supportive community of like-minded professionals, be sure to check out Safety OneSource.
You won't regret it. They're an invaluable resource for anyone who's passionate about workplace safety.
Now, as we wrap up this deep dive into OSHA record keeping, let's take a moment to reflect on some of the key takeaways and leave our listeners with some final thoughts to ponder.
I love a good thought-provoking ending. What do you have in mind?
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, from the 10-employee exemption to the importance of reporting those serious incidents. We've explored the complexities of partially exempt industries and discussed some practical tips for staying compliant.
We've even touched on the human side of record keeping, recognizing that these records represent real people whose lives have been impacted by workplace incidents.
Right, and I think that's a really crucial message to carry with us as we move forward.
Absolutely.
But I'm wondering, what's that one big takeaway that you want our listeners to walk away with today?
You know, if I had to sum it all up in one sentence,
Okay.
I would say knowledge is power.
Okay.
When it comes to OSHA record keeping, understanding the nuances of the regulations is essential.
I love that knowledge is power.
Right.
And the more knowledge we have,
Yes.
the better equipped we are to create safer, healthier workplaces for everyone.
Exactly. So listeners, take the time to educate yourselves, explore OSHA's website, consult with qualified safety professionals, and never stop learning.
And remember, it's not just about checking boxes and filling out forms.
Right.
It's about understanding the why behind those requirements.
Yes.
And using that understanding to make a real difference in people's lives.
Well said.
Well, on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap things up.
I agree. It's been a fantastic deep dive.
It really has. And I'm so grateful for your insights and expertise.
The pleasure was all mine.
Now, before we sign off, I want to leave our listeners with one final question to ponder.
Okay.
We've talked a lot about the importance of staying informed about OSHA regulations. But I'm wondering, what are some proactive steps that safety professionals can take to stay ahead of the curve
Okay.
and anticipate future changes in those regulations?
That's a great question. It's all about being proactive and engaged in the world of safety. So here are a few tips to stay ahead of the curve.
Perfect. I know our listeners are eager for more insights.
First, make it a habit to regularly visit OSHA's website
Okay.
and subscribe to their newsletters and updates. They often publish proposed rule changes and provide opportunities for public comment, so you can stay informed about what's on the horizon.
That's a great way to get those insider insights and to have your voice heard.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the power of networking. Connect with other safety professionals, attend industry conferences, and join professional organizations. Sharing knowledge and experiences can help you stay ahead of the curve and learn from others who are facing similar challenges.
It's all about building that community of support and expertise.
Absolutely. And finally, consider investing in ongoing education and professional development. Attend webinars, take courses, and pursue certifications to enhance your knowledge and skills.
Right.
The field of safety is constantly evolving, and staying current is crucial for success.
Those are fantastic tips.
Yeah.
I know I'm going to be implementing those in my own professional life.
I hope so.
Right.
It's all about being proactive, engaged, and committed to lifelong learning.
Well, on that note, I think it's time for us to say goodbye.
I agree. It's been a wonderful discussion.
Listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into OSHA record keeping. We hope you found it informative, engaging, and maybe even a little bit inspiring.
Stay safe out there.
And keep diving deep.